Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Digital Accessibility Making a Plan and Taking Action webinar. This is hosted by Four Kitchens and led by Max Bronsema, the Director of Web Communication and Technologies at Western Washington University, and Carly Gerard, the Web Accessibility Developer at Western Washington University. Just to give you a little bit of introduction about these two, Max has about 16 years of web development experience, and he likes to solve big problems. Carly has about 3 years of digital and web accessibility experience, and she's been at Western Washington University since the fall of 2017. And now I'll hand it over to Max and Carly to give more information about web accessibility.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, so I just wanted to start with a little bit about our institution, Western Washington University. We're up in the far northwest corner of Washington State, and we hover around 16,000 students. It's kind of a mix of urban, suburban campus with some dorms and things like that. The interesting thing about Western in terms of accessibility is that we're in Washington State, which has this thing called Policy 188 that the state CIO put out a couple of years ago, requiring that all digital things be accessible, both for external and internal users. So we've been working on this for several years, and then have been more recently engaging on improving our web presence as well in terms of accessibility. I'm going to let Carly give you an overview.
Thanks, Max. So since we are a higher education institution, we thought this would be the best framework to share where we are at now, although a lot of these updates can also be applied to some private companies or institutions. So most notably, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, have now become the official recommendation at 2.1. So the guidelines from 2.0 are still current, but 2.1 adds guidelines for users with low vision, maybe with cognitive disabilities, and now even mobile devices. There has also been a Section 508 refresh, which has now been official as of this January, which now incorporates WCAG in its guidelines so that it can be used internationally, even across Europe now, which includes WCAG and current Section 508 standards in their official recommendation as well. And finally, there has been a stall on adding web accessibility guidelines to the Americans with Disabilities Act. There was an advance notice of proposed rulemaking, but just because there is no official United States law regarding web accessibility, there are still a lot of court cases and a lot of complaints filed because web accessibility is somewhat lacking in these areas. So it is still important to ensure that our digital platforms are accessible for all users. But moving on though, why we do accessibility besides lawsuits. They're a key factor for some, but they're not the most important factor in our opinion. Most importantly, it's important to do because it promotes equal access. So the internet is a wonderful place where people can access content regardless of device, regardless for the most part of ability, and regardless of maybe even what time they're visiting the internet in the morning. But if that website or web app isn't designed with accessibility, that makes it harder for some users to visit that application. So one of the greatest ways I heard this phrase was, if someone wanted to buy something or register for a class at 2 in the morning, could they do it? And if they can't, it means that that's not equal access as far as the website is concerned. Accessibility can also enhance UX, so people with disabilities may benefit from proper navigation order, for example, or may benefit from hard-coded actual button elements and not just something that looks like a button. But I would say most people benefit from that, and not just people with disabilities. Accessible websites can also promote more diverse student and employee participation. So if you're looking to hire a group of people and you can't make the application accessible, then chances are you might not get somebody who is blind or may has low vision in your hiring pool, or you may not have a student that is hard of hearing applying to your school if there's any materials needed to understand the process that are maybe media. And finally, accessible code is easier to maintain. Standards change all the time, and proper accessible code will be more likely to match these updates, and it will be easier for developers to maintain rather than any code that doesn't fall in line with these specifications. And with that, I will give it back to Max about things to consider.
Yeah, thanks, Carly. So when approaching your accessibility plan development, these are items we ran across that proved important. So determining who your person is going to be that's dealing with accessibility as their primary job, not as the person that has to report to somebody, but the person that's actually looking at the whole scope, kind of trying to understand where the easy fixes are and where the really hard ones are. And they, of course, can't do that alone. If your institution is really small, maybe. I went to an undergrad college that was about 1,000 people, and perhaps one person could do that job. But as the scope scales, you're going to need a team. And that team doesn't have to work directly with the accessibility lead, but they should have kind of a dotted line reporting and support so that the fixes can be made in a timely fashion and the advice can be sought, because there's lots of complex systems and sometimes a fix is not easy, even though it looks easy. So once you kind of have your team together, you need to figure out what all you need to fix. And one simple way to do that is just to count on your web pages and application interface pages that need to be reviewed. And then also having unique domains. Often in higher, there's research groups that have something that is not a .edu, but they're still funded by your institution. And so if there's ways that your institution is responsible for those sites, they need to get covered in your accessibility kind of audit as you start figuring out what to fix. Vendors are really important. I can't imagine any institution that doesn't have at least one vendor system out there. But things like ticketing, your ERP, your CRM, LMS, those types of things are probably supplied by a vendor. And so building relationships with them around accessibility is important. And then finally, any folks that can make changes on web systems. There's lots of distributed IT models in higher ed. There's lots of centralized models, but making sure you have relationships with the folks. And as Carly mentioned, the plan there on how to go after it with all these people is really important moving forward. So once you have a team, person, and some thoughts on what you need to start looking at, one key part of that is an accessibility statement. Carly's going to go over details of that here shortly. But the accessibility statement really clarifies what you're responsible for, how to report issues through a barrier form so that you can kind of start surfacing issues that you may not be aware of. Training is important moving forward. So you can fix everything, and as soon as somebody that's not aware of an accessibility issue touches the code or touches the content, it's now inaccessible again, and you're both liable for poor user experience or potential lawsuits. So it needs to kind of scope out anyone that works with the digital content. So that's somebody putting new content into a purchasing system internally. If they're not, if they're including a picture of, say, a desk and it doesn't have descriptive text along with it, it's now not accessible. Also, developers that are building out your solutions and your websites, they need to be trained and stay trained with the developments in accessibility. It should be a primary concern, not an afterthought. You got to figure out where you stand. Maybe you're really good, and that would be awesome. But you need to be able to assess that. We'll talk about some of those tools here ahead. And then finally, you have to be able to implement the solutions based on the findings. So this is where you need the team in place, you need the relationships with the vendors, and you need some teeth in policy and enforcement internally around how you're going to actually implement it versus just saying that we can recommend it. So Carly here is going to help us understand accessibility statements.
Thanks. And to further understand it, there are some components that can be broken down and can be included so that you have a robust accessibility statement. A good way to start is a purpose or overview statement, which just generally describes who the intended audience is and why it's posted in the first place. Next, it's key to include a link to a barrier form that somebody can go to let us know of any accessibility issues. Of course, there's discoverable contact info, typically of the accessibility person, but it's also nice to have that barrier form in case somebody may not want to call or may wish to remain anonymous. There are also guidelines for new content to include, so this typically addresses what do we do regarding documents, regarding websites, web pages, about any kind of media. Yes, video, thank you, Max. So, and that typically breaks it out into what each key department or people will be doing. What do we as web tech do for these different areas? What will content creators do? What will students do even as a higher education institution? There is also procuring and purchasing language we include regarding requiring VPAT 2.1 and just generally saying that we commit to trying to purchase as accessible tech as possible, and if that can't be met, what do we do to maybe bridge that gap for inaccessible technology? We also include potential resources for accessibility related services. This can be a disability resource center, this might be HR if you're a company, or this might be equal opportunity or equal employment, just other areas in your institution that might be of interest to your audience. And finally, maybe a section or a page on accountability. This is usually a calendar or some kind of statement of here's how we plan to go about it. We hold ourselves to this plan, and that could be available either internally or externally. So at the bottom of the slide, there's a link to our accessibility statement at www.edu/commitment-accessibility for your viewing. The next key step that Max had previously mentioned was accessibility training. So one optional way to do this is to divide this up between a developer training and a content creator focused training, where developers mainly focus on the coding, best web development practices, focused more on WCAG and accessible rich internet applications or ARIA, as well as using automated tools for evaluating errors, whereas content creators may focus more on the static content itself, either on web, documents, possibly LMS content if you're in higher ed, with some basis on WCAG, but not as much as for developers. But the key here is to make sure that the training is delivered, that it's measured and tracked, so that if there's anybody trying to make any changes to web content or generally any digital content and haven't taken it, that they don't get access to that platform, or that they're contacted and ensured that they do take the training. And from here, Max will discuss some results framework.
Yeah, so result frameworks are kind of part of this concurrent process that you've undertaken with fixing accessibility issues across the enterprise. And so we kind of have two categories of automated and semi-automated tools. Certainly advocate having some sort of automated system to help you out, as changes are not, it's not just a vacuum where you can just tell everyone to stop updating content for 3 years while you fix things. So automated tools give you nice kind of weekly snapshots or daily snapshots depending on the vendor. They can be built into your continuous integration systems, your build systems, to kind of help flag things before they go public. And then semi-automated tools are really helpful for developers and content editors, just kind of giving them a check as they're making pull requests or as they're publishing content. They can kind of like, oh, I forgot this step, or I need to integrate this here. And so on the slide, there's several listed. Encourage you to check them out. They're really helpful. And with that framework, there's that automated piece, but the manual testing we'd advocate is just as important and really uncovers some things that are not obvious. So on the slide, it mentions keyboard-only navigation. So a lot of times we think of that as just being able to tab from one element to the next. In menus, if you can tab and press space or enter and see that it opens, we often think that means it's navigable and accessible. But if you're using a screen reader and it's not announcing that you're opening, say, an accordion menu, it's not accessible. And so potentially automated tools will say, hey, you got the code in there, it's working. But actually having a human test it makes it all the more valuable, and you uncover things that will help improve it for everyone on that equal access and user experience continuum. Is there anything else you want to share about manual testing?
Well, we're very fortunate to have a part-time staff member who is a native JAWS user and can use a variety of other screen readers. So yes, like some of us can use screen readers, but maybe not to the ability of professionals or somebody who's been using it for decades. So we're very fortunate that we have someone who can say like, oh, no, just kidding, this component isn't accessible. We're like, what?
Right.
But it just sort of helps us maintain that check and a level of quality assurance that you may not always get from an automated or even semi-automated tool.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for filling that in.
Sure. And along that line, one of the ways we've tried to implement accessibility solutions is by providing templates. These are out-of-the-box platforms or themes where if somebody asks us, hey, we need a website for our department, that they'll get one of these basic templates. So on the left, ours is the WordPress version. On the right is an example of static HTML, not featured here. We also have a WordPress template that we can help
A Drupal
with.
template.
Sorry, thank you. I mentioned WordPress twice, but no, it's a Drupal template. Thank you, Max. So these themes have accessibility continually improved upon and built in since our department supports them. So they have common features across these three different platforms, like our search feature, our logo, banners, footers, aside features, overall the main bare bones of a site. And those are, we try to make those 100% accessible so that if anybody's creating new content, they don't have to worry about the accessibility of those features. It's already baked in.
Yeah, and then we've been taking that one step further, moving more towards component design. This is a screenshot of Pattern Lab and some work we've been doing. And the idea here is that as we build our components, we test them for accessibility before releasing them into the component library. And then other developers across campus that are kind of using our templates but want to do something slightly different, they have a accessible starting point based on our components, and then we can roll them back in. So this happens that our build system can run some tests for us, and our manual testing can happen in one spot, so we see how they should be working. So we're excited with that moving forward, and then we'll be backporting a lot of these things via Twig templates into Drupal 7 sites, and working on WordPress with the Timber plugin to support Twig.
And finally, our last slide here is about sustaining progress. So it's usually really exciting to get going, to get all the support, possibly institution-wide, but then as people get back into their normal flow of jobs, that excitement may wane a little bit, and accessibility, the worry is that accessibility will fall off the radar. So ways to sort of keep that progress going, to keep making improvements, is absolutely essential to have support from your leadership. This may be executives. In our case, this would be the president or vice presidents of each major area of the school. And we report to them. We say, hey, this is where we're doing well, but we need some of these other features or maybe these funds to help promote more captioning, for example. So internal and external reporting is also really important if you want to ensure that you get the support you need by describing what else you need. That external reporting piece can also be beneficial for your consumers or your audience so that they know that you are committed, and this may further detail what you are doing or what steps you have on the roadmap for making your web platforms further accessible. And finally, very important also to celebrate any success. It is a marathon, not a sprint, as they say. You're not going to be able to fix everything overnight or even within a month or even within a year. We're still working on some issues ourselves that we know could be barriers, but anytime we get something right or anytime that something sounds great on a screen reader or suddenly is keyboard accessible, it's like, yes, finally. So it's a big job though, but nonetheless a very exciting one, and we hope that you think so too. So thank you for taking the time to hear our perspectives, and good luck.
Yes, I agree completely. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Max and Carly, for providing your insight about how to implement, improve, and sustain accessibility. We appreciate your insight and just giving us all that information. If anybody that's been watching and joined us today has any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below, or you can email us at 4Kitchens, howdy, HOWDY, @4kitchens.com. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us, and have a wonderful day.